Hello, career criminals. How you doing? Yesterday's video, I kind of did, uh, not exactly off the cuff, but rather quickly, and it got a lot of response. I didn't expect so much response. So I'd like to continue on the theme a little bit, and I was thinking about this a lot yesterday, and I don't know if there's something coherent in my head or not, but we're going to find out. I wrote a few notes. One of the things I wanted to explain at the beginning is a little off the cuff remark I made during the last video. I said something about, I was reading that Harper's Magazine thing, and I said, as early as 1976, researchers had discovered that there were bad effects of meditation, and I said, oh, as early as that. And I wanted to make sure, I don't know if anybody got the point. One of the commenters got the point. The thing is, this stuff has been written and talked about and examined in great detail by Buddhists for literally thousands of years, since before the birth of Christ. They were researching this very aspect of meditation practice, and then these guys come along and say, as early as 1976, like they just discovered this new thing, which is the kind of arrogance that a lot of Westerners approach meditation with. All this Eastern philosophy and stuff, that's just old primitive junk from from those old weird people over there in the Far East, but we got science. It's such ridiculous stuff. But I wanted to explain the curious phenomenon of Makyo. And Makyo is a word that I got introduced to very early on in my Buddhist practice. I probably first encountered it in the book Three Pillars of Zen by Philip Kapleau. He talks about it there. And I know that Tim McCarthy, my first teacher, talked about it. And it literally means the world of demons. And I even did, at the time, in the early 80s, a little comic called the Zen Stooges, and I made a reference to the phenomena of Makyo in there. So that was, very early on in my practice. So I kind of got steeped in this idea. And the world of demons, it doesn't have to be taken literally, like there are literally demons in a world of demons, but it's a way to express this sort of phenomena that sometimes happens through Zen practice, happens through other meditation practices, but we're talking about Zen here, so it happens in Zen practice. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my sort of worst Makyo experience. I wrote about this in Hardcore Zen, but I've realized recently that a lot of people who watch this channel have never read any of my books, so I'm not so worried about repeating myself. And besides, I don't have a copy of Hardcore Zen around to check, so I'm going to have to do this from memory. But, it was my experience, so I should remember it. Let's see. Leading up to this were a couple of strange events. Things were getting weird for me. I was doing a lot more Zazen. I didn't have a good, strong connection with Nishijima Roshi yet, and Tim was far away back in America. I think I did talk about this on the channel before, but who cares? And so I didn't really have anybody to talk to about this, and things were getting strange. A lot of my worldview was starting to fall apart. This sort of understanding that I had of who I was and what the world I lived in was just starting to crumble. This will happen eventually in Zazen practice. Again, I want to emphasize, like I did yesterday, that this is not something that usually happens at the beginning of Zazen practice. Usually the first few years are just going to be boredom, and you're just going to feel like giving up because it's just nothing is happening. But eventually things start to happen, and that's why you need to take it slow. So all this stuff was happening. My worldview was kind of falling apart, and I remember being on a train in Tokyo, a commuter train, probably a Odakyu train, going to work at Tsuburaya Productions, and just feeling like this isn't reality anymore, or at least it wasn't reality the way I understood it anymore. So eventually things happen, and I'm at a retreat. So I was at a retreat at Tokein Temple, which is where we did our retreats in Shizuoka Prefecture, where Mount Fuji is and all that stuff. I think I was having a rough time in Zazen that day, but I don't particularly remember that. I just remember a lot of rough times in Zazen at Tokein, where it was just like hard going just to get through it, and all this stuff was coming up in my mind that I didn't like, and so on. But when it really hit was that night, and I don't know if it was the first night or the second night, but we all slept in this one fairly large room with tatami mats on the floor, and we were spaced apart in there. The women would sleep in one room, and the men would sleep in the other room. So I'm in the men's room, not the men's room, but the room where the men slept, and I woke up in the middle of the night from just a horrifying nightmare. And I don't remember exactly what the nightmare was, but I do remember my stomach was like turning and crunching and going, so I could feel it right in the pit of my gut. And I woke up feeling total terror. It was as if every fear that I'd ever had in my entire life had just come all at once. I've never felt terror like that before. I've written about this, as I said, in Hardcore Zen and probably elsewhere. And some people have said, oh, you had a panic attack. Well, I've never had a panic attack before or since, but this felt like something more than the word panic attack can encompass. And maybe panic attacks are more than the words panic attack can encompass. But this was a heavy, saturated, total fear. And I was rational enough that I'm looking around this room and everybody's asleep, and I realized there's nothing for me to be scared of, but I was just in just total fear. Now, none of these people were people I knew very well. I don't know what you have in mind when I talk about this Sangha that I practiced with in Japan, but none of them were really my friends. One guy there sort of became a friend, but not even a very close friend. And the rest of them, although they weren't strangers, I knew their names and stuff, but I didn't know them well enough to, we were going to wake up at 4 in the morning with a bangy bell, so I didn't want to get people up at 2 in the morning and say, oh, I've had a bad nightmare, can you read me a story or something like that. It was really, really, really terrifying. And one habit I'd started when I went on these retreats was to always bring some magazine or book or something with me that had nothing to do with Zen. And this is because I'd kind of had little minor freakouts before, and it seemed like it helped to just kind of distract me with something. So I went and I got my backpack, in which I had a copy of 14 Times magazine. If any of you know 14 Times, it's a magazine that kind of looks at weird and unusual phenomena, UFOs and werewolves and whatever, and takes a kind of a interesting scientific look at them. It's a pretty fun magazine. Anyway, it's published in England, and so I had this copy of 14 Times magazine, and I went to the the Hondo, the main area in the temple where the Buddha is and all that stuff, because they kept the lights on there all night. So I went in there, and I'm just looking at my copy. I'm not even really reading my copy of 14 Times magazine, but I'm just kind of just using it as something to kind of distract me and calm me down. And eventually, I don't know how long I sat out there with that magazine, but eventually I got settled enough that I wasn't feeling this adrenaline rush and total fear and everything. And I went back and I managed to go to sleep. Woke up the next morning at 4:30 or 4 or 4:30. I don't remember. I think maybe they rang the bell at 4:15. So split the difference. And went about and did my Zazen. And I had this weird moment during a lecture, where somebody asked Nishijima Roshi a question. And Nishijima answered the question by saying, just don't drink alcohol. And when he said, just don't drink alcohol, he was making eye contact directly with me. And at that moment, I was like, I got it. I understand what I need to do about this. It wasn't about alcohol, because at that time, and still don't drink alcohol, but it was about the kind of delusions that I was putting into my head around that time. And I've never spoken to anybody about the specific nature of what was scaring me or what I was having a nightmare about. Never even to a close friend or somebody I was romantically involved with or anything like that. Never have spoken about it, and I never will. Because it doesn't matter. It's a very personal thing, and this is the deal with Makkyo. Whatever is the thing that you think is the worst thing in the world, out there in the world, the thing that you're protesting about or writing tweets about and saying, how terrible it is that anybody would do this thing. The worst thing, maybe even worse than that thing, that's in you. That is in you. And you are just as craving of that terrible thing as any of the people you point fingers at and blame for bringing that thing into the world. That's what I discovered that night, and it was heavy and it was difficult. But there's an upside to this, and I can't remember which book I wrote about this in. I know I wrote about this in one of my books, so I don't know, maybe somebody in the comment section can tell you. But the thing is, having gone through that and having seen the worst thing that was in my mind directly confronting me like that, there's not much anybody else can bring up that can be worse than that. It didn't make me, let's say it that way, it didn't make me completely immune to ever freaking out again, because, some things happen and there's always triggers. I think everybody has a kind of a level, but if my triggered level of freaking out was here before that moment, it's here now, right out of the screen. It takes a lot more to fluster me now, because I've seen into it. I know I wrote in a book about a meeting that I had at work, which might have involved me losing my job and getting deported from Japan, and it was horrible, and it was all the head guys of the company all like arrayed against me, like accusing me of doing this terrible thing. And that happened sometime after that freak out, and I just kind of went in there and was like, there's nothing. I mean, I was, I wanted to placate them and be a good employee and everything, but there was nothing they could do. They could scare me worse than I had scared myself. That's the upside. But the thing is, I read that story in the Harper's Magazine about Megan, probably a fake name, and how she committed suicide after a retreat. I would guess, if I had to venture a guess, that what she encountered was something like that, and that she might have not had the proper training to know that that is not her. That's not me. That's just something that's there. But if you're confronted with that and you think, oh my God, that's me, I can see why someone would want to commit suicide after having a sort of experience like I had. Because if they thought that's me, then they would think, I better kill myself for the good of the world. That's the level of stuff that we're talking about here. But the other upshot of this is, let me see. When this was presented to me and I'm not going to blame Tim for presenting this, or even Philip Kapleau for presenting it this way, but I got the impression that one needed to go through this, and I think maybe that's true. And it scared me, and it made me kind of not want to practice Zazen, because I'd be going, oh my God, I'd have to go through that. But I do think it's a necessary part of the practice. Now, as I said yesterday, and I'll say it again, it's under most circumstances, it's not something that's going to happen to you on the first day or the first month or the first year or probably even the first decade of your practice, if you handle it slow and if you don't get ambitious about practice. Now, somebody had left a comment for me in the last episode of this YouTube channel, who was a meditation teacher, who was saying that people are being encouraged to do these practices where they're trying to have altered states of consciousness, or they're trying to make something happen in their practice. Those are the kind of practices where you will get this stuff. And this is why a few years ago, when I was all up in arms about that big mind process that Genpo Roshi was promoting, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. He's probably still promoting it. This is why I got so annoyed by that, because that's exactly the kind of practice, a practice that promises you an experience right away. Those are the kind of practices that are dangerous in meditation. So if you find yourself going to a meditation teacher or Sangha or whatever, where they're promising you or encouraging you to have big experiences and encouraging you to have them quickly, to push on and get it fast, don't. Just don't. That would be my advice. Just leave. Just go somewhere else and forget that and just, You give up meditation if you have to, but you can find a teacher who's a lot more sensible than that if you look around. Those are the kind of practices that get you to have these big experiences. Those are the ones that are very dangerous, because you need to acclimate yourself to the developing understanding, because you've lived your whole life with one way of understanding life, the universe, and everything, and you've gotten comfortable with that. But what the Buddhist teachers will tell you is that the thing that you think is normal life, is usual life, and what the way things are supposed to be, is a kind of deep mass hallucination that almost everyone in the world is partaking in to some extent or another. Even so-called enlightened people have to partake in it, because it's part of the very foundation of what it is to be a human being, is to be ensconced, I don't know if that's the word, to be stuck in this kind of bizarre mass hallucination that you take to be reality but is not reality. But you don't want to go into that too fast, because, for a lot of people, that's their touchstone. That's the thing that's holding them in there and making it possible for them to, go to work and go to school and have conversations with their grandma and everything else, is that sort of thing. And you get depersonalization, dissociation, all this other stuff, all these bad versions of it. That's a whole topic I probably shouldn't even attempt to go into, but it can get really hairy there, and you don't want that. The thing is to go in and take it slowly, and don't ever rush the practice, and don't try to get anything from your practice. That's the best advice I can give as far as avoiding that sort of makyo. And, the idea that you're going to go through it someday, now that might tend to scare you like it does me, but I would say to somebody who's scared of that, don't worry too much about it, because if you take your practice slow and you have a teacher, then by the time you get there, you get to the point where the dark stuff is really going to come up and start, making itself known, you've already got some grounding. And as I said yesterday, all that stuff that the secular Buddhists out there poo-poo, all this stuff about heaven realms and hell realms. Makyo is a good example of one of these things that they might poo-poo, and, all this stuff because it's not scientific. All that mythological, poetic stuff that is in the Buddhist literature is there to have a way of dealing with this sort of thing. I mean, it's having a way to deal with all sorts of other things, but among the things it's there intended to do is to help you deal with that. So don't just, that stuff, even the stuff about rebirth and reincarnation and all that stuff, a lot of it is really helpful when you come into the more difficult parts of your practice, because you have a kind of a grounding in some other way of looking at the world that is not this sort of standard cookie cutter way that you've been taught and that you've grown up with. So yeah, that's what I want to say about Makyo. I'm going to go and I've realized I need a chapter in my new book about Makyo, and I didn't write one, so I'm going to go write one. But for now, that's what I'll say about it. And if you have more questions, certainly ask them, and then I'll see what I can do. But if you want to donate to me being able to make more videos about Makyo and other things, here's the URL that you are seeing on the screen of where you can send that money. That is my only way of making a living these days. But as I always say, if you're having financial trouble, you don't have to donate to me, because I'm carrying on, I'm hanging in there, but I'm hanging in there because so many of you kind people do keep donating, and I really appreciate that. Have a good time all the time. Let's see what Ziggy is doing. What you doing, Ziggy? How are you? All right, I'll let you sleep.